What if Ridley Scott directed I Am Legend, and it starred Arnold Schwarzenegger? Well, in the late 90s, that almost happened, as Ridley intended to bring the Darkseekers to life not with CGI, but with terrifying practical makeup effects designed by the team behind Alien 3. And with the first hour of the film featuring no dialogue, Ridley not only wanted to reinvent the on-screen persona of Schwarzenegger, but envisioned the film as a psychological thriller. So let's dive in and take a look at what happened behind the scenes that led us to the Will Smith version, and also take a look at what could have been Ridley Scott's I Am Legend. Before we dive in, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, a spine-chilling book called The Malediction of Llewyn. A thrilling mix of Stephen King's intensity, Dean Koontz suspense, and Cormac McCarthy's gritty depth. The Malediction of Llewyn is a true horror adventure packed with chills, twists, and heart-pounding scares with a truly unforgettable ending. Readers have called it one of the best books they've read in years, a non-stop thriller that's scary as hell, and a captivating experience with vivid imagery that pulls you right into the story. It's been praised for being both thought-provoking and genuinely chilling. This is one horror you won't want to miss. So order now and start reading today by clicking the link in the description below. It's available on Amazon and Kindle, with paperbacks at barnesandnoble.com. You can also listen to the audiobook on Audible, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your audiobooks. Writer Richard Matheson was inspired by Dracula to write I Am Legend, thinking that if one vampire was scary, then a world full of vampires would be utterly terrifying. Ironically, the vampires in Matheson's novel bear little resemblance to the traditional vampire archetype, and instead more closely resemble zombies, as the book would heavily influence the cinematic zombie genre, helping popularize the idea of a global outbreak, a concept that would later become a staple of zombie apocalypse stories. George Romero, widely regarded as the father of the zombie film, would even admit he ripped off I Am Legend when he conceived Night of the Living Dead. After its publication, the book would first be adapted into a film in the 1960s starring Vincent Price. That would be retitled To the Last Man on Earth, before being remade again in the early 70s under the title The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston. However, it wasn't until the 90s, when sci-fi horror films returned in vogue, that Warner Brothers, who owned the rights to the novel, began developing yet another remake. To write it, they turned to Mark Protosevich, who had just written the script to Joel Schumacher's third Batman film that would have seen the return of Jack Nicholson's Joker. To star in the film, Warner Brothers cast Arnold Schwarzenegger, as they not only saw it as an action-driven film, which Schwarzenegger was the king of, but Schwarzenegger was also filming another Warner Brothers movie at the time that was sure to be a monster hit, Batman and Robin. To direct it, Warner Brothers wanted a director who was no stranger to the sci-fi genre, eventually tapping Ridley Scott to helm it. To Warner Brothers, pairing these two together seemed like a home run, as both men had done some of their best work in the sci-fi genre, Ridley with Alien and Blade Runner, and Schwarzenegger with Terminator and Total Recall. However, Ridley didn't care for Protosevich's script, and brought in John Logan to rewrite it, and this version of the film would have opened in the present, during a global pandemic, as Robert Neville, an architect in this version and not a scientist, gets word while working on a site that his wife's condition is worsening. After racing to see her at the hospital, he brings her home to spend her final moments with him alone. The film then jumps forward several years, revealing Neville as the last man on Earth. His career as an architect also carries a haunting irony, as he's now surrounded by the collapse of society and the disintegration of the very infrastructure he once helped build. From here on out, the film would feature no dialogue until its midpoint, emphasizing Neville's isolation as the last man on Earth, as well as his struggle with grief and depression after losing his wife. Ridley wanted to completely reinvent Arnold's on-screen persona, and not rely on any cliched Arnold one-liners, similar to director Terry Gilliam giving Bruce Willis a list of Willis acting cliches that he wasn't allowed to use while acting in 12 Monkeys. When Neville leaves the safety of his compound to scavenge for food and supplies in the ruins of the city, which is always done during the day, his car breaks down, forcing him to stay in the city at night, as the Hemocytes finally come out. After being spotted, Neville is almost killed by the Hemocytes, before he's able to knock one out and take it home with him, where he nurses it back to health, using his own emergency blood supply to feed it. As the days go by, the creature becomes more and more human, revealing itself as a woman, as Neville deduces that his blood, no doubt special since he survived the pandemic, is curing the woman and reversing the infection. He then realizes that with his blood, there could be a chance to save others too, and perhaps all of humanity. Eventually, the woman, named Emma, is able to speak, and begins to remember pieces of her past, as Neville begins to slowly form a bond with her. She tells Neville that he's known as the one who comes in the day to kill her kind, but Neville insists he's just defending himself. When Neville leaves for the city to scavenge for food, the leader of the Hemocytes breaks into Neville's home, sets it ablaze, and kills Emma. When Neville returns, he's devastated, as he's forced to flee the city, shattered and yet again alone. He eventually takes refuge in a deserted ghost town straight out of an old western, setting the stage for an epic showdown as the Hemocytes follow him there, looking to kill the one who was hunting them once once and for all. As they swarm the town, the third act erupts into a brutal, Western-style battle. Just as the dust settles, Neville stumbles upon a young boy, uninfected like himself, leaving him stunned and speechless at the sight of another survivor. To design the Hemocytes, Ridley turned to the team behind Alien 3, Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis. Inspired by Italian waxwork figures from the 1700s, Ridley wanted the Hemocytes to look sickly and skeletal, with prominent bones showing through their emaciated, pale flesh. And while the effects team wondered whether they used bodysuits, prosthetics, animatronics, or a combination of all to bring them to life, Ridley did consider using some CGI enhancements to make the Hemocytes appear even more skeletal, accentuating their lean, ghastly bodies. Ridley also imagined the Hemocytes covering themselves in UV-protected mud and rudimentary clothing crafted from repurposed plastic, trash, and urban debris, creating a distinctive tribal look that showed signs of intelligence and culture, with the Hemocytes also wearing jewelry and body paint. Ridley's approach would have made the Hemocytes not only terrifying but also unique, portraying them with mostly practical effects as a complex tribal society rather than the frenzied CGI-driven creatures seen in the final film. In fact, after Ridley left the project, Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis were asked by Warner Brothers to continue working on it, but the film's new director, Francis Lawrence, felt the Hemocytes, who he renamed to the Darkseekers, were not convincing as portrayed by actors wearing prosthetics, resulting in them switching to CGI, saying the concept behind the infected was that their adrenal glands were open all the time, so they're constantly hyperventilating, which you can't really get actors to do for a long time or they pass out. So what went wrong? The biggest issue was the budget, which soared to over $100 million, far beyond what Warner Brothers was willing to spend after recently producing box office bombs like The Postman and Batman and Robin. And while Ridley rewrote the script to get it down to around $80 million, there was only so much he could cut, with Arnold taking a hefty $20 million for himself, draining the resources needed for the film's costly effects. As a result, Ridley was forced to scale back on the effects-heavy elements of the film, preventing him from executing his vision the way he originally planned. Not only that, but Ridley and Arnold were on a cold streak. Ridley had directed 3 movies in a row that underperformed at the box office: 1492 Conquest of Paradise, White Squall, and G.I. Jane. Meanwhile, Schwarzenegger's star power was fading, with his notorious performance as Mr. Freeze in Warner Brothers' own Batman and Robin marking the low point of his career. Ultimately, Warner Brothers got cold feet, which wasn't helped by the fact that they wanted an action movie and Ridley wanted a quiet psychological thriller. After the project was put in turnaround, Ridley would rejuvenate his career with Gladiator and take John Logan with him to rewrite it, while Arnold would begin stepping back from film roles, eventually setting his sights on becoming governor of California. Warner Brothers would then have the script be rewritten to be more action-oriented, before casting Will Smith, looking to re-team him with Bad Boys director Michael Bay, whose films were notorious for their action and explosions. However, Warner Brothers didn't like the script, resulting in Bay leaving the film. Will Smith would then approach Guillermo del Toro to direct, but he'd ultimately turn it down to direct Hellboy 2. Eventually, Francis Lawrence, who had previously directed Constantine, was hired to direct. And his version of the film is notorious for its alternate ending. The original ending sees Neville make a chilling realization. To the infected, Neville is a monster who snatches them away during the day, when they're most vulnerable, and takes them to his lab to experiment on and ultimately kill. In their eyes, he's a legend, akin to the Boogeyman or Dracula. This also explains the title, I Am Legend. Neville also learns that the Darkseekers aren't mindless monsters, after the Alpha Darkseeker creates a butterfly shape in the glass door, referencing the butterfly-shaped tattoo on his partner's neck, as Neville realizes they're only trying to rescue her. He ends up handing her over without getting the cure. However, when this ending was screened for test audiences, they hated it. The film's director, Francis Lawrence, would say, "We tested it twice and it got wildly rejected. The hero doesn't find the cure, they drive off into the unknown, and the creatures you've been saying are the bad ones the whole time, you learn actually have humanity and aren't the bad ones. The hero's the bad one, and so you've basically turned everything on its head." Instead, the ending would be changed to Neville discovering the cure, giving it to Anna, and then blowing both himself and the attacking Darkseekers up with a grenade, so that Anna can escape with the cure. When the film eventually came out, audiences would criticize both the CGI Darkseekers as well as the underwhelming ending. However, storyboard artist Sylvain Dupré, who worked on Ridley's version of the film, would say, "It would have been a stunning mood piece, unlike anything that anyone would have expected or had been released. It was way beyond an action movie. It had action in it, but the film didn't depend on it. The character of Neville was so original. Ridley had very interesting ideas on how to use him and his nature as an architect. By the time he'd become the last man on Earth, he had actually turned his home into an incredible museum of beautiful paintings and gorgeous structures. He had gone to the Getty Museum and had just taken Monet paintings and put them in his house. If Ridley could have done what he wanted, it would have been a terrific film." Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.